Alexander 1, July 6, 2002 AD. To say that Alexander Roth was the most important person in the history of the universe is debatable, but not at all a statement void of merit. For without him, it is highly probable that nothing would exist at all. Whether the reality he was instrumental in forging could have found a way into existence without him or not is indeterminable. It would rather be like trying to see into one's own eyes without the aid of one's reflection. A constituent of reality cannot escape that reality in order to gain objectivity, and any reality is, for lack of a better understanding, real so long as you are a part of it. So for all that can be measured, by all accounts save that of the ignorant, he is the person most responsible for the Big Bang that brought the universe into being. Therefore, it is fair to say that were it not for him, nothing would exist at all. Because it is reasonable to assume that he was indeed the origin of this paradox. Should the universe have never come to be, Alexander Roth would never have been born. And if Alexander had never been born, the universe would never have been created. Yet he started life as a normal, mortal human being. He worked driving a forklift for a distribution center in Portland, Oregon. It wasn't a job for which he was compensated for any great skill, which was disappointing considering his brilliance, but he did get paid for his time and he needed money for drugs, so it worked for him. He had no ambition to pursue greatness or to do anything important. He just wanted to get high and fuck, and that's how he lived. At least that's how he wanted to live. The getting loaded part was easy, the getting laid part was a challenge. He wasn't ugly or deformed or anything, he just didn't stand out. He wasn't particularly appealing, despite his best efforts to always smell nice and dress well. He was half African and half Native American. Typically, mixed-race couples tended to produce beautiful, healthy children because of the genetic variation, but it seemed to him like he had inherited only the most undesirable genes from both of his parents, lazy eye included. To boot, he was a little shy and kind of a pansy, and the girls seemed to pick up on his apparent lack of confidence. So he spent most nights chasing his tail, and always ended up going to bed with his dick in his own hand and not that of someone else. Still, he would go out to bars and buy girls drinks, and if they seemed cool, offer up the prospect of going to his place to get high. But he seldom got a bite, and he never landed one. He tried the reel at different speeds from different angles, but it just never happened for him. He even offered one money once, one he figured for the type. She didn't even ask how much, she just said, no thanks, but can you take me back to the bar? He had brought her to his apartment, got her lit up, and thought there was a chance, but ended up obliging her request and losing out again. He was a virgin at 23, one seemingly without hope. The world hardly noticed when he disappeared. He had been raised by a single mother, and they didn't speak much after he moved out. After he was missing for a week, a concerned co-worker notified police. They reached out to her, but she didn't seem all that concerned. Her first thoughts were a frightening menagerie, the ilk of any mother, but she quickly rationalized them, knowing that her son was given to impulsive behavior and figured maybe he'd gotten mixed up with a girl finally. That would have been enough to upend his life. So she said, I'm sure he'll turn up. He always does. And that was that. She died in a catastrophic car accident, T-boned by a truck twice the size of her car on the driver's side less than 2 months later. There was a funeral for Sharon, and it said devoted mother on her headstone, but there was never a funeral or service for Alexander. He remained a missing persons case until enough time had passed for him to be declared dead, and his meager existence officially ended with the thump of a rubber stamp substantiating a legal document. His co-workers would sometimes remember him for his analytical skills and his enthusiasm for solving puzzles and the bits of random knowledge he would share. Like, who knew that the word laser was an acronym? I don't remember what it stands for, but Alex would just rattle that kind of shit off the top of his head. Alex was not particularly boastful, but when afforded the opportunity, he would quickly slide the fact that his IQ is higher than Newton's, which was higher than Einstein's, into the conversation when meeting anyone new for the first time. However, it wasn't long until his name failed to come up anymore, and he was all but forgotten. After all, the world was still spinning on its head from the events of 9/11 the year before, when terrorists had attacked the United States. Everyone was glued to the media and talking about conspiracy theories. His disappearance became old news very fast. He had been taken in his sleep, but not taken in any traditional sense. He was dissolved and then reassembled from raw material in a different location, something he knew to be impossible. It would be the first of several seemingly impossible events intertwined with his destiny. For of all things to ever exist, the course of events for the life of Alexander was the least malleable. When the fate of existence hangs in the balance, the rules bend to allow for its assured survival. Nothing is impossible. It just seems that way until the right conditions are met. Then it becomes impossible for the improbable not to transpire, however unlikely it may seem. The room was a silver oval hemisphere with a reflective domed ceiling that dipped to become the walls and met brushed, shining floors. Alexander was asleep on the floor. Where he lay, the floor conformed to the shape of his body and even gave weight to his chest with each inhalation. There were no windows, no remarkable features, except that there was a giant human-shaped extension of the floor that seemed to grow out of the metal and was seemingly composed of the same polished material, waiting patiently for him to wake, watching him sleep through recesses in a nearly featureless, chrome-like facade where eyes would otherwise have been. The form stood silent, watching the sleeping abductee, fully aware of what was about to transpire, running its program, ready. As was expected, Alexander's first words upon waking were, "What the fuck?" He stood and looked around, surprisingly not frightened, and reasoning his alarm well as he took in his almost monochromatic, alien surroundings. Then he saw it, just standing there, looking at him, or rather pointing its eyeless metal head in his direction as if to look at him. It seemed to him like the figure was a poor attempt at anthropomorphizing a drain pipe. He hesitantly said, "Hello?" He felt a surge through him as if he'd aged a few minutes when the disbelief gave over to skepticism, and a calm type of fear set in as the thing responded. "Hello, Alexander." He took a step back, but it didn't matter. He was still exactly the same distance from it as he was before he moved, and still squarely centered in the room, as if the room had shifted around him seamlessly. This caught him off guard, and he tested it again with another few backward steps as he hesitantly asked, "What is this?" His position relative to the room again did not change. "Please clarify your query," it said, its voice seeming to come from every direction at once and in no direction in particular, almost as if Alexander were hearing it from inside his own head and yet not. This response put Alexander surprisingly at ease, and he became visibly less tense, a bit more certain that he was not in danger, but not yet thoroughly dissuaded. He stopped trying to move away from it and instead took an experimental step toward it. He was taken aback a bit when it got closer as he moved toward it, making it seem all the more tall. Then he tried another backward step and again put no more distance between them. It remained a step closer to him compared to where it was before he'd moved toward it. It seemed he could get closer to it, but he couldn't distance himself from it. So he stopped moving. "Where am I?" he asked, throwing scattered glances around, looking for some distinctive feature that could tell him something about what was happening. The room was a monotone note, its only distinguishable features being him, its sole occupant, and the human-like figure that seemed to have grown within it, Alexander's unnamed host. "You are here." It was not teasing him. It was responding with the most valid response it could offer. It was running through a predetermined process, and it gave the pre-programmed answer it was designed to provide. This conversation had happened before. There was no room for variables in the equation, no deviating from the forthcoming script. It did not feel anything, and it was mechanically disingenuine when it expressed remorse for its pending actions. Though it did surprise Alexander, he stayed relatively calm when it said, "I am sorry for what I must do to you." "What are you going to do?" asked Alexander, a sense of desperation setting in that might have shortly given way to panic were it not for the thing's puzzling response. "I must share with you my knowledge," it said frankly. "Knowledge that you once imbued me with, Master." "Oh," Alexander relaxed, only slightly suspicious of the fact that it referred to him as Master. "Why would you apologize for that?" In an instant it was right in front of him, having closed the gap between them without seeming to have moved at all and having covered the distance in no time at all, and Alexander almost lost his bowels. He probably would have if he'd been given time to process what it said next, but it was all over within moments of the words being sounded. "Because you will die," it said, and then it bent down and touched its pseudo-fingertips to Alexander's temples. He didn't even have time to scream.